Hello everybody and welcome to A Question of Property. My name's Lucia France and we have our panel of experts with us here today. John Howard, our property expert with more than 40 years experience in the industry, author of 4 books, is it now, John, on the subject?
Three and one in the oven.
One on the way. So what's the newest one that's about to come out?
It's about the domestic market because most people move once every 7 years, and they've got to remember what to do and what not to do, and there's a lot of tips in there about buying at any time, really, and not just for first-time buyers.
Great. We also have Stefano Lucatello, Senior Partner at Cobalt Law, International Property Lawyers, and our international property expert. So, Stefano, your book is available now as well, isn't it?
There it is.
There it is. Investing in foreign property. And John's read it as well, I believe.
Yeah, it's on its second edition now.
Right, okay.
It had a chapter on Brexit. John and I have discussed this topic long and often.
And unfortunately,
totally
Stefano's wrong.
What he's talking about. That. Absolutely.
Actually, we have got a question about the special relationship that you guys have on this show.
Oh, well, there we go.
And we also have joining us Paul Mahoney, head of Nova Financial. So welcome to Paul. And Paul, you've got your book there as well, seeing as we're on the topic of books.
Yeah.
My
book's actually an international bestseller. I'm not sure anyone else on the panel can say that.
I'm not sure either.
Well, that's because you're based in
my forward is by an international bestseller.
Fantastic. Well, that's good to know. I'll be promoting my book next week. I better work on finishing that.
Is that on yoga?
It's no, it's actually quite scary short stories, and a few of them have been performed on the No Sleep podcast, if anyone would like to listen to that. So we'll come back to that next week. Right, okay, let's start then with Paul today. We've got a question which I think is quite topical for a lot of people who have been furloughed, obviously, due to the COVID-19 situation. So this person who's written in has said, I'm currently furloughed and I may unfortunately lose my job over the next 6 months. Should that affect me purchasing my first buy-to-let property?
Okay. So they're saying it's their first buy-to-let property. The main thing to be concerned about, I would say, if they're potentially going to lose their job and they're looking at buying their first buy-to-let, is about having the income to get a mortgage. Right. Now, they haven't mentioned whether they already own a home. If they do, that puts them in a better position.
Okay.
And there are some lenders who will lend to you without having employment income, so long as you have the resources to support yourself.
Right, okay.
So if you can show that you have funds, for example, to support your lifestyle, some lenders will lend to you without having a minimum income, solely based upon the income that the property you're buying is going to generate.
Right, okay.
So that's one thing to consider. But being a first-time, it seems they're going to be a first-time landlord, that they would be pigeonholing themselves a little bit, trying to get a mortgage without having a job.
Right, okay.
Now, that's not so much the case for somebody who already has buy-to-lets. There's quite a lot of lenders who will lend to you if you're already a landlord without having employment income, especially if you're between jobs. That's not so much of a concern because it becomes much more about the properties you're buying than it does your personal situation. But as a first-time landlord, that there is a slightly smaller market of lenders and products if you were to be between jobs when trying to get a mortgage.
Yeah.
So,
sorry, Paul. Is that quite unusual for somebody to be lent to get a mortgage in that situation, or is it, does it happen quite often?
If they don't have employment income?
Yeah.
It depends on their situation, as I say, because if they don't already own a home and they're not already a landlord, they would struggle to get a buy-to-let mortgage without having employment income.
Right, yeah.
Because they are, I suppose, considered the higher risk borrower because they don't have any other assets and they don't have employment income. It would depend on their resources. If they've got a few £1 million in the bank, they might be okay.
Yeah.
But if they're buying their first buy-to-let, they probably don't. And therefore, if I was them, I probably would want to secure my employment situation before launching into buying a buy-to-let and trying to get a mortgage in a bad scenario. The other thing to consider at this very point in time is that the mortgage market is a difficult one to navigate right now. A lot of lenders have paused applications, especially at the higher loan to values. So pretty much the only real mortgages that are relatively easy to progress at the moment are the much lower loan to value mortgages, because lenders are comfortable progressing them on paper, on desktop valuations, as opposed to in-person surveys.
Pathetic, aren't they really, Paul? They're pathetic, aren't they really, these lenders? Honest to God, they are pathetic. What do they think the hell's going to happen? You know, I mean, it's bonkers. Bonkers,
yeah,
bonkers.
It is a bit crazy, especially when you consider the fact that the average maximum lending is 75%.
Yeah.
You've still got 25% equity there. So, I don't think anybody thinks that the market's going to fall by 25% plus. In logic, I wouldn't have thought, but that someone might argue against me there. But yeah, there's plenty of equity there. It's a fairly safe and robust lending sort of market at the moment, much more so than any previous, financial crisis or anything such as that. So yeah, I agree, John. They are a bit crazy so far as putting things on hold. I don't think it should be happening. But one question I'm getting a lot at the moment is about lenders withdrawing from the market.
Yeah,
that's not
absolutely.
Really. Yeah, but I don't think that's actually the case, John. I think that's been sensationalized a bit. Lenders are pausing applications. They're not withdrawing from the market. I'm very confident that those lenders will be back to the market once all this COVID-19 lockdown stuff is over.
But presumably, Paul, at a slightly lower loan to loan ratio than they are now.
I don't necessarily think so, because the logic we're being given by lenders is that the two main reasons they're not able to progress applications is, one, valuations can't happen, and two, is they're under-resourced and overworked. Under-resourced because of the current situation, people are sick and people working from home, but also the fact that they're getting a massive amount of inquiries about mortgage holidays. So they have to deal with these inquiries, and
that's fair enough. They do,
their current borrowers. Whereas therefore, if they have to deal with their current book, they find it difficult to be taking on new loans. So that's the logic we're being given, as opposed to the fact that they're concerned the market's going to tank.
Right.
Can I just put my penn'orth in, just as the voice of reason here amongst all three of us? John would not agree with me. Yeah, exactly. John wouldn't agree with me. One thing I would say, I would be safeguarding whatever money you've got and trying to live, and I wouldn't be thinking of buying a buy-to-let property at the moment. I think you need to survive and look after your family and buy food and maintain what you've got, as opposed to trying to risk something. And the second thing is, most surveyors don't actually go and do a valuation as it's such. They do a drive-by valuation. So why can't they do a drive-by valuation in the car? We
don't always agree, but I agree with that. This business about not doing valuations is just crazy. Yeah, get in the car. I mean, it's you're allowed to work if you can't work from home. So just get in the car and drive past the damn thing. Most of the time they've got comparables anyway on computers from all these different companies and what they're worth, what they were worth. So I agree with you there. I find that a very weak argument.
But isn't the point that the banks in this torrid time are having the money given to them by the Bank of England and all the rest of it? It's just them that are not letting us borrow the money from them. They're retaining it. Is that right, Paul and John?
Paul?
Yeah, I don't think liquidity is a problem. It's just the fact that the logic because obviously I have a in-house brokerage that I'm the principal of. The logic that lenders are giving to us are those 2 points: valuations and under-resourced and overworked.
Well, we're all that, aren't we, Paul? But we get on with it.
Well, yeah, I was just going to come back to you there, John. You seem to be quite vehement about the lenders being pathetic. Can you just
well, I mean, come on. What all this business about the first thing they all do is run scared in any slight turbulence, and that you can sort of understand that. But the government have said to these banks, I know they have, for a fact, they've said to them they want them to support people, they want them to carry on lending. The one way of the property market dropping is for these banks to behave irrationally.
Right, yeah.
Irresponsibly, and not getting on with valuations and not letting people move when they want to move house, which really causes virtually no risk at all to anyone. At the moment, is crackers. The housing market is the most important industry in the UK, because if you buy a house, you buy a kitchen, bathroom, curtains, carpets, it goes on and on and on. And the government know that, and they need to get us back, opened up these estate agencies and everything else as quick as they can.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much, John. So, John, your first actual proper question for today.
Yes.
I have been a proper property investor for a few years now, but I'm looking to get into property development, which is an area I know that you, John, do a lot of. Should I wait, or should I try and jump in over the next few months?
Okay.
So
well, I'm
wait for this situation to be over.
Okay. Well, I'm impressed that they are a proper property developer. That's something that I'm not often described as myself, so I'm well impressed. So, I think at the moment, personally, I'm looking at deals that I can do within 6 months, or I'm looking at deals that are longer term, the sort of thing Paul buys, where he's, buy to lets for the next 25 years. It's all very boring, but all very safe. What I'm not looking at is doing developments which are going to be 2 years before I can sell them. The time you've bought it, got planning, developed it, built it, and then sold them, because I'm not sure where the market's going to be in 2 years' time, 2 to 3 years' time. I don't know where it's going to be. So I would certainly look round for opportunities, especially part finished opportunities where banks have pulled it back from the current owner because they've messed up and they can't finish it. I'll be looking at those because they're quicker to finish than they are starting from the scratch. But at the moment, I think you need to be a little bit fleet of foot, because if you're in and out fairly quickly, then if the market does drop, the damage is limited. Whereas if it's 2 years, it could be. We just don't know. We don't know. We don't think it's going to drop that much, but we're not sure. So why take that risk? But certainly start looking around, start getting your experience in developing by investigating the situation, but just hold off a little bit.
I'd just like to give Paul the chance to come back at that boring comment there.
Look, I appreciate.
Not on, is it?
Our general approach to property investment, I suppose, is a little bit boring in comparison to what John does as a property developer, but that's very intentional. The fact that we can get strong double-digit returns, 20% plus on the cash invested without taking much risk at all. I don't think those returns are boring, but we focus more on passive property investment rather than going out and getting our hands dirty, and that suits a broader range of people than property development does.
Great. I just thought I'd like to give you the chance to reply there. So thanks, Paul.
He did.
Okay, let's move on to Stefano's first question for today. I own a property in Spain, which I let out for holiday purposes, as well as use it myself some of the year. I rely on the income that this generates. Do you think that in the next 12 months, I will be able to let it out as I have done in the past? So what are your thoughts on that, Stefano?
When he says relies on the income, does he rely on the income to pay any debt has been incurred on the Spanish property, or does he rely on the income for his general life?
I imagine he relies on the income to live off in the UK.
It just says I rely on the income that it generates. Yeah. So yeah.
Right. Well, Spain, like Italy, France, and Portugal, has in the last 2 years introduced rules and regulations as to landlords letting, and it's a big furore, especially on the islands in Mallorca, Minorca, and the Balearic Islands. Because all these English people predominantly who let out their properties were not respecting local laws and bylaws on environmental health, human health, and all the rest of it, such as smoke alarms and electrical standards, wiring standards, and gas certificates, stuff that John and Paul do all day long, sort of things that when, especially Paul, when he buys a buy-to-let, and then it's rented out, you can't rent it out without the proper gas certificates, electrical certificates, and all the other bits and pieces. The people abroad were not doing this. I know it's slightly off what was being asked, but I just thought I'd say that English people think that they've been got at by foreign authorities, and they haven't. What happened is that foreign authorities have brought themselves up to decent levels of protection.
English standards.
Yeah, you're right. You're right,
Yeah.
John. English standards,
Yeah.
and the English people have got away with it for many years, and now they're having to spend money on putting their properties right and bringing.
And rightly so.
Yeah, absolutely, for protection of everyone. Whether we can rent it out or not in the next 12 months is a problem, all sorts of fronts. Why? Because, as I was saying at the beginning, Airbnb, and we've touched on this before, governments have imposed now restrictions of 90 days in most cities and most places of rental for rental purposes, because they are frightened, and it's protectionism, and they are frightened, especially in Spain and the islands, and Balearic Islands came out with it first. They were saying, well, hold on a minute, we've got all these people, foreigners, doing Airbnb. Our hotel industry has been decimated because it's so small as it is. So we're going to bring in new rules, which is you can't rent it out for more than 90 days. And that is now Europe-wide. And it also applies in London if you apply it properly. So that's the first thing. Well, whether he can continue to rent it out, I suppose he will be able to. My view is this, that if you buy a property for rental purposes abroad, I would be tending to rent it out to someone like a professional couple who are going to be in there for 4 or 5 years, who will pay you a lesser rent than you would get in the holiday months, the sort of June to September months. But at least you know that you are getting a constant, not the highest rental, but a constant rental every month for the next 4 or 5 months. 4 or 5 years, sorry. Enter into a proper rental agreement, because remember abroad, another thing, it's not as easy to get tenants out once you've got them in. So get the right tenant in, get them in for a long period, lock them in, and get a professional set, husband and wife, whatever, and you know they're in there, and at least you know you're getting a rental income which will cover your outgoings, your mortgage if you've got one, whatever. But you need to be careful, all sorts of fronts. 1, the rental agreement, get proper legal advice. 2, get the right client. I wouldn't go for a summer months only rental. I would go for a local person who can occupy your premises and will look after them, and you'll get a lesser rent, but you'll get a constant rent.
Yeah, so constant.
Just a question there, Stefano. The 90-day Airbnb rule, is that policed at all?
Yes, I know in Italy and Spain, in France, not so much in Spain, but in Italy and France. In Italy, in Rome now, and in major cities where people have bought rental incomes for the purpose of renting out, especially in Rome where it's a big tourist thing. I've had a client of mine who's actually had the local police officer go around and say, show me your rental agreements, show me how you work this, show me, and then they've actually said, right, go on to Airbnb now and show me how many days you've rented it out. And people have now been fined for it.
And I also know that in Barcelona, Paris, New York, Amsterdam, Airbnb are constantly being fined big amounts of money.
People are going around this, are getting around this by changing the rental vehicle. So they're saying, okay, I had 90 days with XYZ Limited. I'm now trading under ABC.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah.
It's not right. That is totally legal.
No, it's not right. No.
I'd just like to add to that question as well, Stefano, is that some of my friends who are still living in Spain, they have, you literally can't go anywhere at the moment. Lockdown is so strict there. There's all kinds of fines imposed if you're found to be more than 2 of you in a car, or more than 1 of you in a car. So, I think at the moment, certainly for the next 12 months, he might find it very difficult or this person might find it very difficult to rent it out. Yeah. Okay, let's move then to John for your next question for today. You seem to disagree a lot with your other panelist, Stefano, on occasions. Why is that?
It's just I'm the voice of reason. He's not the voice of reason.
Can I just say, what sort of question's that? What I would say,
quite clearly a viewer who understands that what I say is correct and what John says is a little bit, it's a bit.
Well, what I would say is obviously Stefano is a lawyer, and I have to give him credit. He's a very good lawyer, and he's very precise because that's how he's trained to be.
Yeah. And
it's very really sort of black and white, and we do disagree and clash on occasions, but we are good friends. But we do clash, but that's quite healthy. At the end of the day, he's got a view, he's got a professional view, if you like, and I've got a more of a dealing view on occasions, and I think that's the difference. And I think if we were in business together, it would be a great partnership. And the reason for that would be because you'd have the voice of reason, which is Stefano, and then you've got me pushing things forward and trying to get things done. And actually, there's a good lesson there for a really good lesson there. If you're going to go into partnership with someone in business, my business partner who's about to retire, he says he's had enough of me after 28 years, which I can't believe. He's an accountant and he's very cautious and professional. You know, and I'm cautious. Surprisingly, people might think I am cautious, but also, you know, I push forward, and he says we can't quite do it yet, John, or whatever. And I respect what he says, and I respect balance, and I respect what Stefano says. So, you know, that's just how it is. But having a different part, there's no point if you're in business having the same partner, same person. Type of person. You want a different person, and they want to do different jobs as well. There's no point you both going to look at every property in the world. You know, you want one doing finance probably, and one out there doing the deals, for instance.
Yeah,
I mean, John's right. As a lawyer, we're trained to work within parameters and to use whatever laws we have to the best of our clients' advantage, to the best advantage of our clients. And John's got. If I'm not wrong, John, you didn't go to university, whatever, did you? You just got experience of life. So I think we're a bit different.
That's nice, isn't it? Rub that one in. Not that I've got a chip.
I've got to get one over you at least. Come on.
I've got 3 O levels.
All right. But the serious point I'm making is that John is a very experienced developer. He knows his stuff. Why? Because he started from zero. He's trained. He's worked with people. He's learned his trade. And he knows his trade very, very well. I mean, look, he's written 4 books. After all, a man who's written 4 books must know everything he's talking about. So
I'm not sure my English teacher would say that.
Yeah, well, you didn't write the book. Someone else wrote it for you.
I wrote it.
But anyway, seriously, I mean, it's good to banter. We do have good banter. We do disagree. And I think it's, you know, it's usually the case that we do end up on the same page, but
it's healthy. It's healthy. I mean, you know,
Paul's the one that's quiet. Paul's the one that's the voice of reason.
Well, I think Paul and I are just quite sensibly keeping out of this situation.
But I'm not being, Lucy, I'm not being funny. How boring is it on some of these panels where no one ever says anything against each other?
Oh, absolutely.
No one ever disagrees. It's crazy. It's not. That isn't true. They're not being honest with themselves if they are being like that.
Well, it doesn't work. Life doesn't work like that. Everybody's got different opinions. And
what do you think, Paul?
I agree.
Well, it's good that we've got we all feel comfortable enough to be ourselves here and say what we think. Right, we've not got very long left, guys, so I'm just going to move on to Paul's last question for today here. I've been looking at buy-to-let opportunities in London, but property seems quite expensive there. Should I look at other areas?
Okay, so this is quite a common question too.
Yeah.
We're based in London. Most of our client base is in London. Go back a few years, it was much easier to get a good opportunity in London that's stacked up both from a numbers and a growth potential perspective. There's been quite a few changes in the market over the past few years. So we've had Section 24, which has changed the way that buy-to-let mortgage interest is able to be tax deductible, stamp duty premiums on buy-to-let properties, and also mortgage serviceability changes. All of those changes have impacted different types of properties in different ways, and they've mostly hurt high-value, low-yield properties the most because they are much harder to stack up because you can borrow less, you're paying much more stamp duty, and therefore, from a numbers perspective, that they're much more difficult to make work. Whereas lower-value, high-yield properties are much easier to make work, and a lot of cases have actually benefited from these changes because it's caused a shift in the market. You know, the old sort of cliche approach of buying in London just for, to break even just for growth doesn't work as well anymore.
Okay.
Because, for example, the average property price in London is about £500,000, and you can only borrow about 55 to 60% against the average London property now, given serviceability changes. Therefore, you're applying at least 200,000 to a property that is probably just going to break even after all your costs, so your neutral cash flow position, and therefore you're speculating on capital growth in an area that's already grown substantially and is already unaffordable to the people that live there. You know, the average property prices in London are about 12 times the average income. Whereas lenders will only lend you 4 to 5 times.
Yeah.
So that's a big gap there. Whereas we can take that same sort of money of 200 grand and we could buy 2, 3, maybe even 4 properties in somewhere like Birmingham, Manchester, Liverpool, which are the main cities we've been focusing on of late, that are going to give you a significant net yield. You know, you can expect to achieve a net yield on funds applied of somewhere between 5 to 10% net. So that's a pretty decent cash buffer.
Okay.
And in my opinion, in the right properties in the right areas, more growth potential as well.
Okay.
So when you compare those two, certainly on a numbers perspective, there's no comparison whatsoever. You know, the latter works much better. And I suppose one thing that people sometimes need to get their head around is if, for example, they're living in London, that it's not necessary, you don't necessarily have to invest, you know, around the corner. If you have the right team around you and you're being unemotional and commercially minded when it comes to your decision-making process, you can invest anywhere because, you know, something I quite often say is, you know, we've got clients in Australia, the Middle East, all around the world, and their investments perform just as well as the client who lives down the road from their investment. You know, so long as you've got the right management team in place. So
yeah, and trust the people you're working with, I guess, as well.
Yeah, you know, we used to do a little bit in London going back about 5 years, but now from a buy-to-let perspective, it's very, very difficult to justify. And to do it just for the sake of the fact you live there, I think is the wrong mindset to have.
Right.
What about the properties, Paul, in the suburbs like Barking and all these places that are coming up now, where, you know, the end of the Piccadilly line, the end of the District line, Central line, and all the rest
even then, Stefano, you know, you've got places like Luton, Slough, Barking, as you say, areas that have been a bit underloved in the past and probably have good reason to grow in value from where they are now. Yes, they make more sense than the more central areas, I would say. But still, when you compare them to the centre of Birmingham or the centre of Manchester, you know, you're investing in those places that are, you know, 15, 20 miles from the centre of London as satellite towns to London. Now, why would you invest there when you can invest right in the centre of a major city?
Yeah.
That's kind of my view anyway.
Yeah, right.
Guys, thank you so much for all of your input today. I'm afraid we're going to have to draw it to a close there. Thank you very much to Stefano, to Paul, and to John. I'm Lucia France. If you'd like to get in touch about all of these books are available to buy online, of course, as well. Something to read while you're in lockdown. And if you do want to get in touch, just email us, ask@aquestionofproperty.co.uk. Thank you
Come on,
so
guys,
much.
Send us your questions.
What's that?
We want your questions.
Yes, exactly. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks for watching.